How's it going, everybody? And welcome to another installment of Tech Support Thursday. I am doing my best to try to stay up with all of this. So I'm going to attempt to answer a couple of these questions that have been posted and get them knocked out. So let's go ahead and dive into some of these questions. I'm going to try to answer them. I may need clarification and so on and so forth, but we'll see what we can do. So question is why do ISPs choose to distribute some subnets to the customer and vice versa? So customer to the service provider using a AAA server when the customer already has a connection with the ISP and an up or running BGP connection. Why do ISPs choose to distribute some subnets to the customer and vice versa, so the customer to the service provider, using a AAA server when the customer already has a connection with the ISP and an up or running BGP connection? I have to say that question doesn't make sense to me. Depending on the deployment type, and typically the only time I've ever seen AAA leveraged or a authentication, authorization, and accounting is typically in a PPPoE / DSL type of peering, where in a PPPoE configuration with a broadband access group or BBA group, you can configure your side, so the CPE, customer premise equipment, with a username and password through PAP or CHAP. So PAP is the password authentication protocol, CHAP is the challenge handshake authentication protocol, and you can authenticate via CHAP or through PPPoE and using PAP or CHAP with the username and password being sent to the edge, and then there is the PE router, provider edge, can be configured with AAA information that calls back to a AAA server to authenticate. That's sort of similar how cable works too, to a certain extent. Cable modems operate similarly, or with the Cable Management Termination System, or the CMTS, where the cable modem MAC address is advertised to the provider, and that MAC address is on a list of authorized MAC addresses to be allowed onto the network. So those are the only two things that I can think of when it comes to that. I'm not familiar with BGP and how that comes into play, so you'll have to clarify what you mean by that, because I'm really not sure. So let's see here. When I realized when talking to friends that worked in a local ISP mobile operator, I was surprised to see a lot of different in terms of things behind the CEs, POPs, DSL connections, MUX, Layer 2 devices, unicast connections, and things I had no idea about. When I read Orhan's service provider design book, it talked about an overview of these things. If I want to know about the ISP infrastructure, any recommendations to read? So you unpacked a lot. So some of these terms, customer edge, CE, POP, point of presence, which is essentially how a service provider, the connections that they provide to their customers, whether they're private, public, or a combination of both, terminate to. So if you hear the term POP, you're typically referring to a location near the customer's location that is the service provider, that is ran by the service provider. So that's what that typically means. Also sometimes called a central office or a CO or a LEC, local exchange carrier. So it depends on where you are and the type of connectivity and things like that. So just be cognizant of those things. DSL, PPPoE, just describe that. DSL is basically the same thing. PPPoA or PPP over ATM is another way of looking at that. A MUX is multiplexing or a bundling or an aggregation of things. So the muxing is trying to take a single connection and break it out into multiple, or vice versa. So that's what that basically means. Layer 2 devices, unicast connections, and so on and so forth. If you got some information on that, then cool. If that is, if you're looking for more of a read, I would be curious to know if you're looking for anything specific. If you are looking for stuff that's specific, you're probably going to have to dive into the technology or the capability specifically for that. So one of the ones that I thought was actually fascinating was mobile broadband and dealing with like 4G and 5G and how the E node B and all of that communication comes together. So I learned enough about it to be dangerous. Like I know the general basics of how stuff works, and I've forgotten a lot of the terms, but I do generally understand how all that stuff is put together. Can we get a glimpse of your last SP lab that you were practicing? It's nothing fancy. Let's see here. Whoops, wrong window. Right now I am currently working through segment routing. I'm doing a deep technical dive on it right now, and the intention is to test out SR, several different flavors of it being deployed, SRTE, path computation element, and stuff like that, because that's going to be a big focus of the lab exam. And then once I've gotten through all of that, I've done a lot with SRv6 already. I'm planning on getting through this lab, and then I have two other topologies that I'm going to be working through. This will be the SR and SRTE topology for the most part, and a lot of different variations of configurations will be done on these 18 devices. Most of it's going to be on the XR boxes. Then I'm going to do go back over the SR to SRv6 migration paths, inner working gateway, the dual connected PE, and then the ASBR to ASBR communication. That's my next step. I've already gone through it once. I'm going to go back through it again, but this time do a better job of documenting it and put it actually into a workbook so that you guys will have an actual lab you can follow along with. And then dedicated SRv6. I've already knocked out the SRv6 section with that and how that comes into play and the variations that go into it. I think I've got, what do I have? I'm looking off screen. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 labs on SRv6. So we'll see how that turns out. So that's that. Can you please explain the terms local breakout or direct breakout that are sometimes used by ISPs with regards to customer traffic? Oh, that's easy. If you've got if you have a device that terminates internet, whether it's, regardless of what type it is, if it's LTE, broadband, DSL cable, or fiber, or maybe some sort of microwave or satellite, like maybe like a Starlink, and your internal users need to access things online, then the traffic goes to the edge device, probably more likely a firewall, and then from the firewall it rides out to the internet. There is no private transport or a VPN connection of some sort back to a central location where you have your internet, centralized internet drain. You are essentially putting the internet at the remote location or the branch office. That's what local internet breakout or direct breakout refers to. So that's what that means. So let's see here. What else is there? Thanks again for the decade recognition. What does someone say? When studying inter-MPLS VPNs, inter-AS MPLS VPNs, and troubleshooting them, I understand how the implementation works, but I don't understand how missing configuration in some parts can affect my output. Some people just know by know so by looking at your output and say, check the ASPR next hop self command, and they are right. What is your advice for studying and understanding this troubleshooting wise? Well, that's actually really simple. I try to, whatever technology that I'm learning, whether it's as simple as creating a VLAN on a switch and then putting ports or applying that VLAN to different interfaces to provide logical segmentation, or if it's as advanced as, and there's different levels of advanced, I guess you could say, as advanced as doing, say, carrier supporting carrier in an inter-AS MPLS design. All of those, whatever you're studying, the thing that I try to build in my mind is an ordered list of steps that I would go through and how I get something up and running. And I do it a number of times so that I become fluent in getting that thing up and running. So the more times you do it, the more comfortable you're going to become with it. So practice makes permanent. But it's also one of those things where you have to do it continuously. You can't stop doing it and then expect 10 years later to still be able to remember off the top of your head. Unless it's something super simple, like creating a VLAN and then going underneath the interfaces that VLAN is going to be along to, or those interfaces that are going to be placed in that VLAN, and then going from there. If you're talking something more complex where there's multiple layers of configuration at different points and you're trying to build an overlaying architecture, then it's one of those things where you have to know, based off of your workflow, what configuration steps you need to put to make, what verification steps you need to go through in order to make sure things are working as you're progressing. And to me, it's a configure and verify. So you configure something, you verify its operation. And you should know, like, if you're building two different service providers and you're trying to do, say, MPLS option A, back-to-back VRFs on ASBRs, then you need to get both service providers up and running first. So you build it so that each service provider has two locations that attach to the same customer, meaning that when you advertise the routes from one PE router, that another PE router for the same customer is going to learn routes. So you can verify intra-AS, and then once you've got that working on both sides, then all that's good to go. Then you take it a step further, and now you start playing around with option A, where you create your sub-interfaces, you create your VRFs, and then you place those sub-interfaces inside of a VRF. You do your IP addressing, you do your IGP or BGP configuration, and redistribute if you're doing IGP and BGP, and go from that. But it's an ordered list of steps that you have to go through, and now they could be listed in some sort of documentation or notes that you've been taking, something along those lines. But it's one of those things where you have to do it over and over and over again. So the more comfortable you are with it, the better off you're going to be. And that's one of the reasons why, like, for example, I spend so much time going over topics to make sure that I understand how they work and what they're doing, because it's one of those things, it takes a lot to remember some of the stuff. So I will say that the body of the blueprint that you're studying for a particular certification, you're not going to be an expert on every little detail. You can try, but I will be honest with you that there will be things that you will pick up much easier than others. One of the things that I have always struggled with, and it's only because of the fact that it's not easily verifiable, and there's a lot of individual steps, so I tend to steer away from it because of the level of effort, is QoS. Like, I really don't ever test it. I understand how it works, and I understand how classification and marking and policing and shaping and all that stuff work. I understand all of that and how that comes into play, and how you can have different class types, and you can use different AF values for assured forwarding and things like that. All of that to say, when you're digging into something, you needed to know it generally. You should be able to get it working off the top of your head, even if that means that the workflow, you know what needs to be configured, and if you have to question mark your way through the CLI to remember what commands you have to apply, go for it. I do that all the time. whether it's I'm trying to learn something for the first time or I'm trying to retain how to do it. Usually I will test something out 3, 4, 5 times before I go to try to record content on it, just so that I look like I'm fluent in it. It may look easy in the end product, right? At the end state, it looks like I'm fluid in it. Things work, verifications operate, and it may look like I'm locked in, but it took a lot of prep to get me to that point. So these are some of the things that you're going to want to do as well once you get to a certain point. Like I've been able to configure IPsec VPNs off the top of my head for years, but I just remember the steps, right? I built a workflow in my head, even though I would have to sit there and think, like, before I click the record button, I might have to jot some notes down or what have you, but a lot of the times I can just think of it off the top of my head and I know what to do. And it might take me a minute to, like, okay, I need to create the ISACAMP policy, then I need to create the pre-shared key. I do all my phase 1 configuration. And, if it's going to be a crypto map-based VPN, then I need to create my access lists and make sure that I have my interesting traffic mapped. If there's going to be NAT involved, what do I have to do to my NAT entries to make sure that I don't accidentally NAT VPN traffic and have it bypass the crypto process? Because NAT happens before crypto. So it's just a number of steps that you have to remember, and it's fluidity is what it really comes down to. So hopefully that answers that question. How do you handle pressure post CCIE? Because one, you're expected to magically solve everything despite unclear issues and complex issues. So regardless of where you're at in your career, post certification, CCNA, CCNP, CCIE, JNCIE, VCIX, MCSE, whatever, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, whatever certification you've chosen to go after, and that's just a lot of networking and infrastructure certifications. My suggestion with that is you have to understand why you're there. You have to understand the problem that you're being brought in to try to help solve. Because people don't bring me in unless there's really a problem or something isn't working correctly, and I've dealt with both configuration and operational issues. Configuration issues are usually really, really easy to solve because then I just have to look at the config and go, I think this might be the problem based off what I'm seeing. So I just did that today for a customer. They sent me a configuration and I go, yeah, I think this is your problem. Go ahead and remove that and test. And I haven't gotten any feedback yet, but that's part of the process. But it's one of those things where you have to understand the problem first. It's a fact-finding mission first. And then once you understand the problem, then you can start providing solutions. So like G.I. Joe said, knowing is half the battle. So if you understand the problem you're walking into, you can better assess the eventual outcome. So how do I handle the pressure? One problem at a time. I wouldn't say there's any real pressure to handle. Some challenges that I'm presented with are more difficult than others to solve. I remember this one specific issue a while back. It was a data center. There was 2 data centers for a level 1 trauma center that I used to support, and they had this solution working where they had this virtual machine sitting in their data center that provided the multicast feed for all of the, if you walk down a hospital wing on a particular floor, all the monitors that are outside of the room, the patient rooms, are getting populated with information. And so the problem was if that virtual machine moved between data centers, then that multicast feed stopped working. So I had never dealt with tenant routed multicast in a multi-site VXLAN deployment before. So I had to dig into that one, and it took me a long time, and I really couldn't lab it out. I got it as close as I possibly could, and there's a lot of back and forth with Cisco, and trying to figure out the problem. And as I broke down multicast operations and what should be expected, the Cisco engineer, he validated that I was correct in my understanding of how things should work in the operations, and I jumped from device to device and verified along the way. I said, I can confirm your multicast traffic. Like, I see it, how it's operating. I can get in here and I can make sure I can confirm it's working. But we needed to make a couple of changes, and it was modifying the existing infrastructure, so the existing configuration. And I had probably made half a dozen attempts to try to fix it. And the first, we'll say 5, didn't go well. I mean, it didn't break anything, but it also didn't fix the problem. So after jumping through a bunch of hoops, and I was pretty confident that I had it fixed, I didn't really have a way of validating it because, number one, even in a lab, I couldn't recreate the entire end-to-end problem, meaning I couldn't create a VMware environment in Eve where vCenters were used to move a virtual machine between data centers. I simply couldn't do that. I could build out a multi-site VXLAN fabric, get everything up and running, get MAC address propagation to happen. I could get all of the networking specific things to operate, but I couldn't replicate the actual end state. So, at least without dedicated hardware and a very robust lab, that would have taken me a lot of time to build just to prove out this was going to work. So, I very clearly remember traveling and asking for a later maintenance window because I was going to be busy with something else. Jumped on the call, copied the configuration details in that I had sent over, and as soon as we had a bunch of people on the call, I made the configuration changes, and I sat back because there was literally nothing else I could do. And the VMware admin moved the virtual machine. The virtual machine application guys were on the call. The application admins were on the call. The administrators for that wing of the hospital were on the call. So probably talking 20 people. And so I made the config changes, and we asked the tester to test. And lo and behold, I'll never forget her comment, it's never stopped working. But before it would stop, like all of a sudden you'd see eventually as time would go on, you'd see all of the data that had been received stopped showing up because it was consistent refresh, multicast traffic, right? It's consistent flow. So I said, I was a bit surprised. Like 5 other times I had attempted to fix this and I hadn't been able to get it to work. That one jumps out at me just because of the fact of how long it took me, and I think it took me 9 months to fix that one. So, but it was an evolution of their infrastructure, and then once that got fixed, I had to write up a white paper on it and what I had done, and so that if any other customers had a similar design, we knew what to do. There was a white paper that people could go reach out to, and I was probably pulled into half a dozen other customer engagements because I was the expert on tenant routed multicast and VXLAN EVPN multi-site deployments. So, very corner case. I felt like a CCIE when I walked out of that one because I felt like it took an exorbitant amount of time to figure that one out. Last question before we tag out. Did you take Narbic's Bootcamp, or would you recommend it? I've never taken a Bootcamp. I would say between Narbic's probably the only bootcamp I would recommend. I know a lot of people that did take his bootcamp. It's no joke, from what I've heard. But I've never personally taken a bootcamp. It's never been something that I've been ever offered to go take, or I've put in the request for them, and it's always been denied because it's too expensive. So I've always just been my dad used to say, it's time to put your nose to the grindstone and get after it. Pull your bootstraps up and get after it. It just means you put your head down and get to work. So that's that. So I think I answered quite a few of them. There's a little bit of follow-up that is needed on this question here, this AAA question. You'll have to backfill that, but that is pretty much what I've got for you guys. Until next time, we'll continue on down the road. We have some other questions that we'll dive into and go from there. So until next time, guys, have a good one.